Okay, hello world, I am JC. I just want to make a quick, kind of video tutorial about how to make a fidget spinner um, with just some bearings, a little bit of epoxy putty, um, and of course, trusty pocket knife and some time. And the reason I want to make this is because most of these tutorials that you've probably seen on YouTube um, show like them using wood, or like zip ties or some like funky like pipe metal like clamps. Um, and honestly, those are a little out there for me, especially the zip tie one. Really, if you're someone who just wants like a really simple fidget spinner with minimal effort, nothing too fancy but still solid, this is really the best way to go. It took me a long time to kind of figure out the best way to stick these bearings together because they are metal, and if you didn't know, it's really hard to stick metal to metal. So I'm just going to show you a quick rundown of what you can kind of do with this epoxy putty and some bearings, and a couple of things that you can do to kind of go from a early or just really basic version to something that might be a little bit more polished looking, um, with some vinyl that you can put on top of to make it look a little bit more professional, or just look a little bit cooler. So I'll get into that here. All right, so the first thing that you're going to need is at least three 608 style bearings. These are definitely the kind that you will find on a skateboard. I bought these off of Amazon. They were supposed to be ABEC 9, but in reality, they're probably like ABEC 1 or 2. Really not that good quality, but I don't think it matters for our purposes. We're not really going to be spinning these at really high speeds or at be generating that much heat. So really almost any ABEC rating will do. If you want to spring for higher ABECs, like these are ABEC 11s, that's fine. These are definitely going to be a little bit smoother, but it's really just how much you want to spend and what your preferences are. Second, you are going to need a flat surface to work on. So what I've done is I've taken this piece of paper. I've drawn a few lines on it. I've measured out increments. These are, I believe, 5 centimeter increments here, and this is really just to give me kind of an idea of where I should be placing my bearings and how far apart they should be. Because what the most important part of this process is making sure that your bearings are all the same distance apart from each other. If you don't do this, you will end up with a spinner that is like really wobbly, really not that fun to hold or play with, just because it's so unstable. The second part is that you do want to kind of make sure that you get them all on the same line. So you see how all of these kind of align with that top line there. That's also important for balance and making sure that it spins in the most stable way. And that's really that is the most satisfying way to play with these, because like I said, if it's not balanced well, and if it's hanging off to one side like this prototype that I made in the beginning, this really isn't well balanced at all. If I added another bearing onto the end here, it would just end in disaster. So really the easiest way to get good balance and to get good spacing is to just try and get the bearings as close to each other as possible. That's sort of what I did try to do with this one here. You can see though that there is still a little bit of space there in between each bearing. That's almost inevitable, and you do kind of want that because that'll give you a good contact with the epoxy putty, and so it'll really help them kind of stick together. But the closer that they are, generally the easier it is to really get that measurement right. So definitely draw yourself out a little grid if you can with a ruler, and make sure that you are prepared to really get it done the right time first, because this epoxy putty, it is malleable, and you can work with it for at least 1 or 2 minutes after you mix it and cut it, but it does harden really quick, and that's part of the reason why I like this stuff. Because you're not sitting there for hours waiting for it to dry and set and cure and whatever. You can have a working version within 20 to 30 minutes of actually starting. It probably won't look as nice as this, because this does take a lot of extra work to really make it look as clean and as polished, and the edges really rounded and everything. But a bare bones, spinner, you can definitely get done within a few minutes with this particular medium. Now, this stuff I bought from Ace Hardware. This is Plumber's Epoxy Putty. $3 or $4, really not too expensive. It's comparable, I believe, to the JB QuickSteel, which is another epoxy putty. You might have heard of Mighty Putty, which is, that as seen on TV putty that they do all those crazy things with, and, like they hang the garden hose hanger onto the wall with some putty, whatever. But really, this is the best stuff I have found. It is very, very tricky to get metal to stick to metal. So definitely pick up some of this. Doesn't have to be Ace Hardware, doesn't have to say Plumber's Epoxy Putty, but do kind of make sure that it does say that you can stick metal to metal with it. Alright, so before you go sticking this putty onto these bearings here, you do want to make sure that you clean the edges, make sure that there's no oil or grease on it. You can do that with just some soap and water. If you have some rubbing alcohol, isopropyl alcohol, that'll work even better. Really, you just want to do that so that you make sure that the contact is really solid, because the last thing you want to do is be spinning this thing and have the bearings go flying off and hitting your coworkers, hitting your family and friends. So definitely make sure that you get it cleaned. After you do that, you can definitely start with the epoxy putty. Now, I've already cut off a tiny piece here. This is actually plenty of putty to get at least one of these sides done. So might be a little hard because I have to do this with one hand, but I'm gonna try and mix this and then get it stuck onto here so that we can kind of get a working model going here. So I put on some latex rubber gloves for this because the putty does kind of stick to your hands a bit. I ended up having putty like in the ridges of my fingerprints. So definitely, if you have some of those, put those on. Gotta keep mixing this here. It should start to feel a little warm once you've got the mixing all going. I'm pretty sure that's a chemical reaction. But once you do have it all mixed, there we go. Let's see if I can do this with one hand here. All right, so I'm gonna press those together. Don't worry about it being perfect. It really does not have to look absolutely perfect. You can have some putty spilling over the sides, going over the top. Try not to get it in the bearing. It's generally not a good idea. But again, like I said, don't really worry about it being perfect. You just need to get them stuck together for now, and you just need the material to be there, because what we'll do is we will go in afterwards with our trusty pocket knife over there and perhaps a sanding block, and we'll take off the unnecessary edges and material so that we can make it look nicer. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video here and kind of cut some of this off so I can replace it and put it on the sides, make this look a little bit nicer while it's still moldable. Okay, so I was able to kind of move the putty around, mold it a bit so that it was a bit more uniform. As you're doing this, you can still see it is a bit malleable. But again, as you're doing this, you do kind of want to periodically place it down onto your flat surface and just kind of press it down. What you're doing here is you're making sure that the bearings are aligned, and that one's not higher than the other or lower, and just kind of making sure that everything is looking pretty straight there. So what we're gonna do is I've put this on my little kind of measuring drawing here, and we can see that it does seem to be okay. There is a little bit of distance between the two bearings, but that's acceptable. Really, we won't know whether or not this is okay until after we add the third bearing, because that's the crucial part where you do have to make sure everything is lined up, and make sure that the distances are equal, or else you will end up with a unbalanced spinner. As far as the first two bearings go, don't really worry about making them line up on the top here. That does not matter so much, because it's not going to matter where you put the bearing around the next bearing. You can always draw a straight line across them. So that does not matter as much. But when the third one comes in, which I'll show you, we will have to take extra special care to make sure that everything is solid and aligned here. So it's probably been about 5 minutes maybe since I started, and in between the time I paused the video and the video time right now, and it's already starting to form up pretty well here. It is still a tiny bit malleable, but it is pretty solid. In fact, we can probably spin it around a little if these bearings didn't suck so much. The one thing I didn't mention is that if you have the shields off, I would recommend putting them back on while you're doing this. I always eventually do take the shields off, especially in the middle one, just because it is easier to hold, and it does kind of make them spin a little bit freer. As far as the ones on the outside, that is kind of up to you, but during this process, definitely make sure that you keep the shields on, because what's going to happen is you'll get little pieces of putty, like right here, that may accidentally fall in, and you do not want that. You really don't want that at all. So keep the shields on, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the video, just kind of get myself resituated here, let this harden up for a couple more minutes, and then I'm going to connect this next bearing with the rest of the putty, and then we will go from there. Okay, so a couple of things before we move on here. As I said, in the third portion, getting the alignment right is a critical piece. So what I've done is I've taken the two bearings and I've just stuck them on top of some duct tape here, and made sure that the top's aligned with the top of the duct tape. The top edge of this duct tape should be a straight edge, and basically what we'll do is as we pick it up and as we mold it, we should be able to make sure that this is always in line with the rest of the bearings. So that'll make it a little bit easier for us here. The second part is sometimes you'll get so much putty over the middle edges that it is kind of hard to tell how far apart they are. So what I like to do is, while it's still perhaps even while it's still a little bit malleable, or even after it's dried, is take my pocket knife and actually just scrape away the middle part here so that you can actually see how far apart they are, and you can use that to compare the next bearing. So that's a couple of things you'll want to do before you do this final step here. And let me just fix this duct tape and then we'll be right back. Alright, so we're ready to go. I'm going to go ahead and mix the last bit of putty that we have here. And one part I didn't mention before is to make sure you get a really good even cut on the putty, because if you do get a little bit more of the outside substance than you do the inner substance, or vice versa, you'll end up with kind of an off mix. And so what will happen is the putty either won't harden at all, or it'll harden way too fast. So do make sure that you do try and cut this stuff really evenly. That's why I use a knife to cut it. It does leave a little bit of residue on the blades, so you could use a plastic knife if that works better for you. but just do whatever works. Just make sure that you do get that cut nice and even. So this looks to be all mixed up now. So I'm gonna go ahead and start. Let's put this here. You can see this is already a lot of putty, and it's probably all gonna get squished out. All right. So we can see there that the edge should be lined. So I'm just gonna go ahead and start squishing it out so we can get it a little bit closer there. And same thing again, I'm gonna pause the video so I can kind of cut this top edge off and then add it around the sides so we can make it a little more uniform and check our distance between the bearings. All right, so while the putty is still a little bit malleable, it hasn't quite set yet, we do want to kind of go through the same procedure where we are, pressing it flat. I want to make sure that it's, perfectly aligned in that respect, and then going through and making sure that it does line up with our line. And you'll want to check both the sides, so flip it over, make sure that the top of the bearings match with the line. Looks pretty good. And then just kind of check your distance too. You want to make sure that if you can, that you get sort of the same distance here. You can see that I did pull up some of the putty here as I was trying to cut it away to see the edge of the bearing. That more or less will probably be fine. We'll have to see. And you can already tell that it is pretty rough looking right now. The putty is not it's not super easy to work with, but it is a lot better than the alternatives. I mean, you can already see, we can give it a little bit of a spin. It's already setting pretty well. So we will come back in maybe 5 minutes here, and we will see what we can do to kind of clean this up and make this look good. So we've given it a couple minutes to dry now. You can go ahead and give it a spin. Should feel all right. The next step is kind of evening out the putty so that we get a little bit more uniform look and weight. And how I'm gonna do that is just with my pocket knife. Really all you have to do is just give it a good cut. You can kind of even shave it off. And it's really not that hard. It will take a little bit of force, so make sure you're using a good knife. If you're a child, make sure you have a parent do this for you, because it does take a little bit of muscle. But the major parts are just making sure that you go in and kind of cut these larger edges off like that. What I often do is I come through here and kind of do like a scraping motion across the top, just to kind of make it all even and flat. And I'm gonna again pause the video and come back because I do need 2 hands to do this, but I will come back and show you what it looks like after I've cleaned it up a bit with a knife. Alright, so as you can see, I've taken off quite a lot of the putty with the knife here. And I'm not gonna lie, it looks pretty rough. Some people would just stop here. I mean, you can. If you feel like it's balanced enough and you don't really care how it looks, go ahead and just kind of clean up the shields probably a bit. Make sure that there's no putty, anywhere in the bearing. And there you go. That's your finished spinner. If you do want to take it another few steps, you can try and even out these, bumps with your knife, or something else. I've got some sanding blocks that I just purchased, so I'm going to try that out, and then I'll get back to you after I've tried that out a bit. Alright, so I was able to clean up the final product just a bit. Basically what I did was, just took a sander to it, wanted to make sure that everything was smooth, and it looks pretty good now. Again, you don't have to do all these extra steps. You don't have to sand anything. You don't have to, make it look absolutely, perfect. It'll work either way as long as it's well balanced. Normally what I would do after this step is grab some of my favorite vinyl. This is just some plastic, like 3D like carbon fiber print type vinyl, and you can cover it and make it look a little bit nicer. This is an example of one I've built with some blue vinyl. This is a 3-sided one that I built with some blue vinyl again. I won't really get into putting the vinyl on and everything because that's almost an entirely different skill set. It is a lot harder to work with vinyl, especially in these really small, kind of tiny applications. This black vinyl that I got is actually really difficult to work with because it has these air release channels in it. But definitely, I mean, from this point, you can basically do whatever you want. You know, you can take a Sharpie to it, you could paint it, cover it with stickers, you could leave it how it is, but it will be pretty much functional. This one that I made, this is the first time that I've made it with these cheap Chinese Amazon bearings that I bought. It is a little bit wobbly, but it'll work. Definitely, I would recommend trying to pick up some bearings that, you know, are at least somewhat reputable. These ones were not that great. They may even fall apart at some point. These ones were pulled off a skateboard. These ones were ABEC 11s I bought on Amazon. More expensive, but definitely smoother. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Leave any questions in the comments if you are curious about anything, or if you have any better options for actually putting these bearings together and making something that's pretty solid. This stuff works really, really, really well. I mean, it's really solid. It feels really solid in your hand. I've dropped it plenty of times on like concrete, tile. It does take a lot of force to actually break these apart. Even like some of the ones that I've messed up on like this, only reason I haven't actually reused these bearings is because it is so hard to take this stuff off of it. You really have to apply some really, see, I can't even get it. You had to put some real pressure on there to actually get these to come apart once it's fully set. I would recommend, you know, not actually playing with this over tile or any really hard, you know, surfaces for at least a few hours after you're fully done putting it together. But other than that, you're pretty much ready to go. I mean, as long as it's hardened to the touch, you can play with it all you want. I haven't messed one up or broken it in the process of making it by doing that yet. So definitely, again, leave any comments or questions if you have any, and let me know how yours go. You know, post some pictures. I would love to see other people who wanted to build fidget spinners but didn't have a 3D printer, didn't want to do any of those other crazy, weird contraptions. But yep, that's pretty much it. Have a wonderful day.